Let's.
I'm gonna go ahead and do it. Here we go. Brief introduction, which I'll go ahead and do, and welcome you all to this session on technology, social justice, and the changing workplace. This is taking part as part of the University of Maryland's Alumni Association's Career Week, which is a week-long virtual series to help alumni conquer, steer, and advance their careers. And we are recording, so I hope you're comfortable with that. I'm legally obligated to say that by participating, you acknowledge and consent to your image, likeness, and voice being recorded. And if you'd like to use the closed captioning, there should be a closed captioning button at the bottom of your panel. Since we're pretty small, I think we should go ahead and try to make this as conversational and interactive as we can. So please, feel free to share your own experiences, your own challenges, your own successes. We're interested in knowing what issues you've been grappling with. And perhaps our panelists today can help you think through some of those issues to get to positive outcomes. I'm also going to invite everybody, feel free to use the chat, feel free to raise your hand using the little reaction button anytime, and we'll stop the conversation and call on you. I would like to acknowledge that every community owes its existence and strength to the generations who came before. Those generations that contributed their hopes and dreams and energies into making the history that led to this very moment. Some of those people were brought to North America against their will. Some were drawn to migrate from their homes in hopes of a better life. And some have lived on this land for countless generations. The University of Maryland sits on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people and was built in part by those held in enslavement. And we pay respect to those whose land, labor, and lives were stolen. And we recognize that their descendants and their cultures, now in different and partial forms, continue to shape our world in remarkable and important ways. My name is Patrick Warfield. I am descended from those who enslaved, and likely from the violence inflicted upon those who were enslaved. And I am today reminded of the crimes and the suffering that led to my ability to appear here before you today as the Associate Dean for the Arts in the College of Arts and Humanities and the director of a new campus-wide initiative called Arts for All, which seeks to address some small corner of those wrongs by making the creative experience accessible to and representative of all students at the University of Maryland, connecting the arts to other disciplines, especially the sciences, and placing our creative talents firmly in the service of social justice as we work to address what President Darrell Pines has called the grand challenges of our time. And I am delighted to be joined today by three remarkable ArtHUE alumni who have themselves forged innovative and impactful careers in the arts. And I think you'll find their stories and their insights important starting places as we consider how creativity can help to lead the way in integrating social justice and leveraging technology in the changing workplace. So I'm going to introduce each of our panelists and ask them in turn if they would please share first a fond memory of their time as Terps, and second, a Maryland experience that has been impactful in their careers. So I'm going to start with Kelly Colburn, who earned her MFA at College Park in 2018. She is now a DC-based multidisciplinary artist working as a producer, director, designer, and deviser for live performance. She is the artistic lead for theater at Flying V and the digital producer for Theater Alliance. As a director and performance maker, she creates athletic and thought-producing experimental work that explores themes of displacement at home, forced experience, and identity. As a projection and multimedia designer, her work explores how we engage, ignore, enhance, remember our personal and shared histories. So welcome, Kelly. And could you go ahead and give us a fond memory and an impactful Maryland experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I also realized my pronouns are not listed, but they are she, they, and Kelly. Yeah, so impactful and fond memory at UMD. I think is probably all the late nights we would spend writing papers or working on shows, and just the general community at the Clarice Smith Performing Arts Center of the master's Ph.D. programs, just all of us staying up late, talking art, philosophy, culture, and that really just being like immersed and not really thinking about other things in the world aside from the things that excited us.
That is strangely reminiscent of my own fond memories from my college career. Dr. Tuliza Fleming earned her Ph.D. in art history from the University of Maryland in 2007, and she is currently the Curator of American Art at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. During her tenure there, she has built the museum's foundational collection in American art. She has supervised the creation of multimedia exhibits, curated traveling exhibit, and served as a lead curator for the museum's inaugural exhibit, Visual Art and the American Experience. So welcome to Lisa. Would you like to share some memories?
I think that one of my most salient memories was meeting David Driscoll. I went to University of Maryland specifically to study with him. And I remember meeting him at an art gallery opening, the University of Maryland's art gallery, and introducing myself. He had met my parents the year before I was born, and they bought a work of art by him, and he remembered that, and he invited me to his home. And I was really scared to go because I thought that he would realize I didn't know anything, but he was very kind. And I remember seeing artwork on his wall that I had seen in books. And it was the first time I recognized that these artworks that are featured in books can be part of someone's home. And that was something I'll always remember about going to Maryland.
That's amazing. And for those of you that haven't been over the Driscoll Center, there's a majestic new mural by a brand new professor of art, Brandon Donahue, right outside. And I think the exhibit I last saw is now down, but some really remarkable work happening at the Driscoll Center that bears his name. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ceylon Mitchell earned his Master of Music degree in flute performance at Maryland in 2016 and is currently a doctoral candidate here in College Park, where he holds a graduate certificate in multimedia journalism. Originally from Anchorage, Ceylon is a musician entrepreneur on a mission to celebrate Black and Latinx voices. In addition to performing, he supports artists and arts organizations with personalized multimedia production and digital marketing, and is the founder and co-owner of M3, Mitchell Media and Marketing. He was a Strathmore Artist in Residence in 2021 and has what I understand is a new position as Assistant Director of Communications and Creative Media at Washington Performing Arts. Welcome, Ceylon.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It's a joy to be here. Hopefully you guys can hear me clearly. I'm at your local Panera shop, so hopefully the Wi-Fi is strong. But yeah, my pronouns are he, him, his. I am an African-American male wearing a golden Nike polo, sitting at a booth. And I am currently in Baltimore, Maryland, the historic land of the Piscataway and Susquehanna tribes. And let's see the prompts. A fond memory that I have from my time at Maryland, from my master's degree time there, was working with amazing, talented colleagues with various different backgrounds, especially within the chamber music program in the School of Music, which is really sort of at the core of its DNA of the musical training. And our time together as colleagues eventually led to us forming our own, I would say, pre-professional ensemble woodwind quintet called Potomac Winds, that we were able to really take a lot of professional experiences both on and off campus, and we're all friends and colleagues to this day, which is great. And then an impactful Maryland experience for me was upon graduation, I was fortunate enough to get a position transitioning from being a student to staff on campus, and I worked in the Office of Community Engagement in my first marketing communications job, working for them. And that was such an impactful experience because it allowed me to get to know the greater College Park area and really see a lot of the initiatives and programs that were really bringing together both the campus and the city of College Park. So sort of this campus, university, and city partnerships that are really thriving and allow the resources that the campus has to be able to be used in sort of the 5-mile radius of the university. So I'm just thrilled to be here.
Fantastic. Yeah, one of the things I know that I'm most fond about this School of Music and the School of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies is the way we sort of form a tiny community within this giant research university, and we build relationships that last for full careers. And I'm very proud of that. So I thought we'd begin our conversation by thinking about the role of social justice in the arts. And I'm gonna go ahead, audience, please feel free to drop things in the chat or raise your hand. But I want to begin by asking each of you, and maybe we can go in the reverse order and start with Ceylon, to say a few words about how you think about social justice in your own work as an artist, And also, has your thinking at all changed during the pandemic and in light of Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and a very tense political environment that we've been experiencing? So how do the arts and social justice come together for you?
For me, there have been impactful quotes written about how artists cannot separate the times that they're in, and they can't separate sort of the politics and broader issues, right? It's not sort of just creating and refining a craft in a vacuum. It's really sort of taking what's happening in the world and reflecting that in what you do in your own sort of artist statement and your artist mission. And so for me, just on the artist side, I've just found it really impactful to, whenever possible, for my own education and for those audiences that I'm presenting it in front of, to be able to show that specifically sort of more traditional arts like classical music, they may have their roots in sort of Western classical, even white supremacist foundations, but really being able to broaden the reach of said classical music and just show that it's simply a tool to share the stories and the narratives and the voices of those throughout the world. So I've found so much joy throughout my master's and currently in my doctorate, specifically of sharing the stories of really the Black diaspora throughout the Americas. So from Cuba and the Caribbean to Brazil and South America to African Americans here in the States. And so I think because representation truly does matter, it builds equity in the arts, truly, and specifically racial equity, to be able to use something that was a traditional art form, but put it in the hands and tell the stories of those throughout the world. And just shortly, as an arts administrator working with the Washington Performing Arts, their founder, Patrick Hayes, his motto is "Everybody in, nobody out." And so the programming for that presenting organization that really truly uses DC as its stage by partnering with venues throughout the area, there truly is inclusive programming throughout genres and throughout cultures and communities that really help to bring that to really the global international community that is DC. And so it's great to see and great to be a part of an organization that truly cares about sharing everyone's stories.
So I was hearing something there about an art which sometimes has had a very narrow focus and served one group of people, and expanding the spotlight to tell a wider range of stories while remaining sort of within the structures of an art. That's one kind of interesting approach. Tuliza, would you like to add anything to that? Your work at the Smithsonian is certainly right at the center of social justice issues.
Yes, absolutely. I've always been interested in social justice issues as they intersected with art. Growing up, my father ran an African-American History and Culture Museum, and they were the first institution in the country that actively built a collection of art dealing with social justice issues, specifically from the Black arts movement. I used to think everyone collected that art, and it wasn't until I went to college and went to a local art museum there that I realized that this is something that very few people were collecting or thought was important outside of the Black arts community. So that really made me become dedicated to changing that landscape. And that's when I decided I wanted to become a curator at a major art museum and really sort of change that dynamic. And so working at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, I was able to do so. And we have been dedicated to collecting art that deals with social justice issues. We also have an exhibition up based upon our permanent collection of art dealing with social justice issues called Reckoning, Protest, Defiance, Resilience. And I'm really proud that we were able to do that because it also connects with other areas of our museum, the history galleries, community galleries, and culture galleries that also address these issues of social justice throughout the history of the United States.
Thank you. I'm kind of thinking about that in dialogue with what Ceylon was talking about. In your case, you're talking about how our own individual experiences can color what we assume to be out in the world.
Yes.
And sometimes needing to turn the page to show a different side of that world. It's
Absolutely.
really interesting. Kelly, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the arts I know this to be true. The arts is traditionally a discipline of passion. And when I think about social justice and the arts, and like especially as we're emerging out of the pandemic, and how we as people individually, as well as in our different varying communities and the places that we work, I think about how this time has really forced us to reevaluate our values, what we hold dear, the legacy that we want to leave in a more holistic way. And so the intersection of like social justice and arts in this particular moment in time that's like thrilling and inspiring to me is thinking about the ways in which organizations, and specifically arts organizations, are starting to support their artists artistically, financially, entrepreneurially, really revolutionizing practices so that we aren't like the arts are for all. The arts are there to support the people who make it, the people who consume it, as opposed to trying to just like keep the organization alive. I think it's a balance of putting your values first and understanding that your values are people, and not just how the numbers run or, who you are particularly serving at that moment, and who has traditionally been served in many, many moments throughout history.
Again, a lot there. There's thinking about art as the people who create, not the in the moment, not simply the people who have created in the past, and how do we support that creative process in our immediate world. I want to give you all a chance, I could think, to react to each other. Were there things that resonated with you or that you want to comment upon?
Well, I think that this idea of communities engaging artists in more direct and unique ways is really very interesting. And the support that's pouring out for projects and artworks and exhibitions and programs that really address these issues that we're grappling with historically and contemporarily. And so I think that's a really wonderful thing that's happening in this country. And also how younger generations are really pushing for equity in the workplace, equity in public sphere, equity in our economic situations and political situations. I think that's really interesting because our generation, my generation, didn't necessarily protest to this degree. And to see young people not only protesting, but making a huge difference is something that I'm really gratified to see.
Yeah, I'll just add, as someone who I guess is a part of the current generation, I think that, there's a difference in philanthropy a generation ago to now, where, things that were, the audiences that would sort of engage in the arts and who would give to the arts, like that's changed and behaviors have to change. And my generation cares much more about sort of broader issues like Tuliza was saying, like pay equity in general. People talk about pay your artists, but also it's about making sure that those behind the scenes, those arts administrators are also being paid with the same equity as well. So across gender and race and the like, and also getting into upper management as well. Sometimes there's been a trend where everyone but the C-suite might be diverse, but then that's sort of that last frontier tends to still be sort of white and male and the like, and so that's something that we love to see there, and also connecting the arts to broader issues. We think about environment as well, to making sure that we're actually making a difference there with climate change. So I think it's important to make sure that our arts are being a part of the broader conversation rather than staying in a bubble.
So there were a few things there that kind of lead into my, I guess, the next question, which is, are there ways that your experiences with social justice within the arts can help lead people not directly into the arts towards more awareness of social justice issues? And I heard your pay equity comment, for example, right? That's something we could do across industries, to think more about how we advertise pay, how we're transparent about compensation, how we think about not just pay as a kind of compensation, but all elements of the workplace as a compensation. And I would be interested to hear if you have thoughts about how the arts might lend lessons to other industries.
Well, for me, ultimately, just beyond storytelling, um, I guess really for me, it's equitable storytelling, right? Like, I think that's a huge lesson that the arts can tell to broader industries. We can look at sort of Silicon Valley and see that how they crave and they really lock on to creativity and innovation. I mean, and in some ways they always have, but especially today, that's something that they look for, in addition to more of those soft skills in the people who they hire, in those sort of skills. Artists and arts managers, we just we have to be, as we've spoken just internally in our pre-meeting, we've talking about how we've had to be adaptable and improvisatory as arts managers and arts leaders, and other industries are seeing how important that is in their business practices.
Kelly, please, anything to add?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I
No,
had
go-
something to add.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, I think that's something that other industries might learn from the arts, that I think we do really well in, is celebrating the diversity and the uniqueness of any given individual. I feel like in theater specifically, some of the processes that I'm really excited by are ones in which it's a collaborative effort. And in some other industries, it can be very prescriptive about the type of person you're looking for and what they need to fulfill, and the type of skills they must have. Whereas in the arts, there really is a celebration of who you are and what you bring to the table. And depending on that assemblage of people, you can create something really beautiful and fantastic and dynamic and new, that perhaps some other industries do not necessarily do, because it's more of product over process and something that can be repeatable.
Interesting.
And I would say for me, one of the things I've noticed that's happening, at least for me and my circle of colleagues, is that there are more requests by businesses, large businesses, to speak about the arts as they intersect with social justice issues. And that's something that I have recently been asked to do that I haven't been asked to do in the past. And I think that these organizations, it's not just during Black History Month, are really taking it seriously in terms of how to reach out to their staff and educate their staff. And I think that art is a really palatable way to go about that. And people are more comfortable with looking at art and talking about the issues, as opposed to, I think, really doing it in a more direct way. So I think the arts can be a sort of a vehicle through which you can explore these issues to a larger audience that might not necessarily go to a museum.
That's so interesting that people outside the arts are looking to artists to talk about issues of equity or diversity.
Absolutely.
And part of it too, I think for me, at least in the performing arts, I suppose it would be true in the visual arts too, is that your product is so clear, right? You're putting something on the stage or something on the wall, so you can see if you've been, or hear if you've been successful at diversity or not, right? You can't hide it because the product is so obvious. And when art deals with social justice issues, it allows us to take an almost imagined stance, a storytelling stance towards social justice. We're allowed to talk about things in ways that were harder to do in the more real world. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that resonates with you at all or not.
Mm-hmm.
Well, could we begin shifting our conversation towards technology a little bit? That was the other half of our topic. And I'm thinking in my own life, right? Technology not that long ago didn't play much of an obvious role, or at least emerging technologies didn't play much of an obvious role in artistic work. We painted or we played our instruments the way people had for 100 years. So what are the ways that which technology has impacted the work you're doing in music, theater, and the visual arts?
Well, I can start that off. As I said before, we recently opened an exhibition called Reckoning, Protest, Defiance, Resilience. And one of the things that we included in that exhibition is an app that is called the Hi app. And visitors can come to the museum. There are 10 works of art that are featured in this app. They can use their camera, take a picture of the artwork, and then be led to a page where you can learn more about this artwork, how it intersects with contemporary issues or not, how it intersects with other objects in the museum, and things that they can really think about in terms of how they're interpreting the artwork that they're looking at. And so this is the second time that we've done this in our museum, and it's really been a joy to work on. And instead of just the art curators contributing, we had many people in the museum have input into this app, which I think only makes it stronger.
Do you find it useful to have people that can bridge the technology end and the artistic end in building an app like that, or are they two separate worlds?
I am not that well versed in a lot of technology, unfortunately. So we do have a great team of people that help put this together and also bring different perspectives into what people may want to see in an app. Definitely, I'm ensconced in art history and art, but I think it's important to have other voices present and other voices represented in the technology.
I often am thinking about in what ways, how would things look different, right? If artists were directly involved in the development of the technology, do they push it in interesting ways?
Mm-hmm.
And the technologists directly involved in the development of art, do they push artists to think in new ways? But that's sort of my interesting space.
Mm-hmm.
Ceylon and Kelly, do you have things to add about technology?
Well, I can just say, oh, sorry if I was cutting you off, Kelly. I'll just say with my business, it literally is built on like multimedia production and like digital marketing. So the things that I really think are important is, especially that I've seen and that I've been a part of creating, especially during the pandemic for artists and arts organizations, is, you know, going back to something that Kelly said about process over product. I think that when you're able to sort of create any sort of, just for example, if you can create documentary content or videos that give people a sense of the process about how something is made, right? For example, I think that allows them to have a deeper understanding. Some industries, some topics, like rocket science, for example, or any other sort of, some STEM fields are harder to sort of break down, but I think because anyone can be an artist and anyone can participate in said artist, when they are able to see how a show is made, how a piece of art is created sort of from beginning to end, and that artistic process, I think that brings them much more sort of ownership and appreciation of how it was made. And when you can use that in various forms and in various media platform types, that can live on demand, right? And that meet people where they are. I think you create an equitable experience. I think you create a deeper experience. And you can help to enrich someone's life when they can be able to see themselves as the creator.
Yeah, part of what Arts for All thinks about is that you don't necessarily have to be a professional flutist to create music. You don't have to be a professional dancer to create dance. That doesn't mean there's not roles for those professionals, but there's a possibility for expression for everyone. And when you can see the back part of the art, that I think helps people recognize it's not that hard to get there, right? They have it within them to be creative. Kelly, you want to add something?
Yes, I'll keep it brief, but I think I can speak to this like from 3 avenues just in the positions that I occupy. And so kind of jumping off of what Ceylon said, at Flying V, we have we're a performing arts organization, and one of our wings is specifically on digital media. And so it's about online live performance spaces. And that doesn't mean like a theatrical Zoom reading where everybody is like a tiny little box and they kind of only occupy this space. We're looking at like what like this nerd culture gamification, like what is the online experience in which people are interacting with each other in real time, and they are immersed, and there is a story, and they are invested. And so when we talk about seeing yourself as a creator, I love that, because as part of our organization, we want people to, part of our mission statement is inspiring people to live life with a sense of adventure. And so as we're looking to like see yourself as a creator or as your own, the hero of your own story, you know, we're offering people digital experiences of like, what does it look like to watch someone write a letter to their ex-lover through a Google Doc, which is so silly, but it's so part of the world that we live in, or on their Evernote, or, you know, what does a story look like if it is told all through memes, which is like part of the digital native, like in the way that we interact with technology. So that's like some of the flying bee nerd stuff and how we, you know, intersect storytelling with like the online digital experience that is so much a part of like our life right now, like the scrolling, the tapping, the typing. And then in terms of like my life as a freelancer and a multimedia designer, I'm constantly living at the intersection of technology and like live performance art and storytelling, and like, you know, a very traditional piece of art that doesn't really like new stuff. But in the same way, we're pushing liveness with new technology. And so one example is like working with dance companies and having like cameras capture what the dancers are doing and then inputting that into a generative system that can produce graphics in real time. And so, for instance, there was a piece that I saw that had two dancers, and whenever they were dancing close to one another, there was like swirling lotus leaves around them. And then when they went far apart, the lotus leaves would like burst away. And so that real-time reactive technology in performance is exciting because it doesn't box you into the same thing being done every night, right? Like there, we have this idea of theater or theater performance, any of these things being like the allure of Broadway is that you can go every time and like those dancers are gonna like, you know, hit their marks and that scenery is gonna come in perfectly. But I think that in some of the more experimental art spaces, we're looking at ways in which we can be surprising every night so that when you come back, it is just a little different. And that's the reason you keep coming back, because it is exciting and unexpected. So that was two. I thought there was the third one, but not right now.
That's fantastic. And I'm going to drop in the chat in case anybody in our audience is interested. Our Hugh Dean Bonnie Thornton Dill does a race equity and justice colloquium, and on February 17th, we'll have Alexa Lothan, who's a professor in the Harriet Tubman Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. But her work, I'm going to drop in a little description there, is around fan fiction, something that was sort of tangential to what you were just saying there, and the way fan fiction and social justice and fantasy can play out in this online space. So I invite you to come to that. She's an absolutely fantastically interesting scholar. I should also mention, for those of you who don't know, the University of Maryland has recently launched a new undergraduate major in immersive media and design that's a partnership between the Department of Art and Computer Science, and students work in both fields to sort of think about how can immersive media, virtual reality, augmented reality enhance all sorts of spaces for video games with social justice components, for example. And we will, in April, be doing a kind of festival of this work, so you can actually see what students are creating. And we're bringing in a number of really intriguing artists from around the nation that work in this space. There's a lot going on in that kind of technology art world. Did I step on anybody's toes? You want to add anything?
I'll just add that to Kelly's point. I mean, and to your point, Patrick, I think, yeah, immersive experiences are, when the arts are done well, like that's like what separates us from other industries, and that's what they crave, and that's what they wish and love to do. Like when you have the Apples and the Googles who want to create this VR technology to where you feel like you're in a video game, you feel like you're in a different place, yada yada. And I look forward to sort of VR, AR. It's always been sort of like very popular, and people want to participate in it. But I think sort of the last threshold that hopefully will happen sooner than later is like making consumer-friendly, affordable ways to actually do it. Like the technology is there, but right now you got to spend a couple $1,000s to be able to like really be there. So hopefully that's something in the near future that we can do. And one other example I wanted to give, just since music is my thing, a thing that I always sort of experience I love within music that really depends on the audience is music and dance music. Like, and I'm not just saying like dance stands for evolution or anything like that, but I'm saying literally something when you look at just sort of global roots in global traditions. Literally, the band may be on stage or not, but they thrive and they feed off of each other with the audience, who are the dancers, and that's across any genre, and that's what keeps us coming back again and again to concerts of any shape and size. So just wanted to add that.
Well, you're right in my wheelhouse about music and dance. There's something, someone who played in dance orchestras for a long time, there's something really exhilarating about having to read that audience and think about what do they want more of? How do we keep them going? How do we keep them moving? It's a wonderful thing artists can do. And I'm intrigued by the idea of theater doing the same thing, how the theater engaging with the audience in a real moment-to-moment way. I want to open it up to our audience participants, and maybe could we drop our spotlight so that we can see everybody? Does that make sense? Either way. Oh, there we go. Are there questions from our audience for any of our panelists about issues of the intersection between art and social justice or art and technology?
I also invite everybody to turn their cameras on if they'd like.
Yeah, if you're comfortable with your camera on, that's great, but you certainly don't have to. We seem to have only lost, oh, there we go, there we go.
Hi, I have a question.
Absolutely.
Is there a perception that art and social justice is new, or are we just looking at it in a way that relates to the times that we're in? That's all.
Who wants to take that?
I think for our museum, art and social justice is a continuum. And with regard to art, African-American artists expressing issues of social justice, that's occurred as early as 1840. And so many Black artists have been engaged in the subject by virtue of being Black in America. It is an issue that you cannot ignore, no matter who you are, what's your race, gender, or regionality. I mean, we're all dealing with some of these same issues. And so we recently, our collection actually has artworks that deal with social justice issues for the past 100 years. So I've never seen it as something just contemporary. I unfortunately see a lot of things that people have fought to change for the better, such as voting rights, move backwards. So things that we thought were solved are coming back to haunt us. And I think that artists who were dealing with it at the time were using that as a call to action. And now we have contemporary artists doing that as well.
I'll just add, because I definitely wanted Tuliza to give us the history lesson there, and I'm so glad she did. My thing is to the original question. The arts and social justice has always been, intertwined. Those who are on the front lines are always being participants, and those artists who are there to capture it through various mediums. That's nothing new. I do think what is a bit more new and a bit more emphasis and a bit more spotlight on is because oftentimes stories and narratives and histories are often taught and spotlighted by the victors. I think that we're kind of going back in history and being able to approach things in a much more sort of democratized way and be able to make sure that we're showing the full breadth of experiences and perspectives. And so I think that is getting much more attention in our sort of modern day. And so and obviously the beauty of, there are bad parts, but the beauty of things like social media and digital media at large is that because we can sort of broaden the scope of people telling their stories through narratives, through journalism and the like. And so I think that's a big part of what we're able to do now that is great. And that is very much different from, say, the civil rights era.
Yeah, I think that, just going back to what Ceylon mentioned, earlier, the arts have a duty and typically do hold up a mirror to society. And so I feel like these, and then again, as Tuliza has said, like these things have always worked in tandem with one another. But one thing that I can say is that I think that what artists have done successfully is to make certain perspectives more digestible to potentially to people who don't understand. And that, I think that there is, art that is meant to grab you by your shirt and shake you into reality and shake you into empathy. But then I think that there are other, some artists are really able to work subtly and sort of chip away at whatever the bias is and the prejudice and the preconceptions to like incept or plant the seeds of change into people. And I think both things are completely valuable. And as, Ceylon and Tuliza have said, they have always gone hand in hand. I think in many ways, art, at least from my perspective, until I became a young adult, art was always about fantasy. And then at a certain point, that's shifted when I could start to imagine myself in said fantasy. And I think that's where representation and social justice comes in, when it's like, oh shit, no, I want to build a world for myself to imagine myself in and the next 7 generations, right? Like now that we're starting to move away from just the moment that we live in. And it's like, okay, how does this moment that we live in affect everybody else who's, coming after me? And let's be honest, on the route we're going with climate change, it's not going to be another 7 generations, but we might as well start now to attempt to, solve, the challenges of our ancestors across the board.
As the musicologist, I'll just add that, music has always been a form of social resistance. I have a student right now working on the band leader, Francis Johnson, who was an African-American musician before the Civil War in Philadelphia. Much of his music is about social resistance. I just last night attended a concert of music by Ignatius Sancho, who was an 18th century musician in London, who had been born enslaved and was the first Black person to publish music in the West. And his music too is a social resistance. What I'm not certain about though, is that all institutions have recognized that, right? That as the arts enter institutions, whether they're universities or orchestras or museums, has it always been seen as social resistance? And has it always been accepted as social resistance? Other thoughts or questions from our participants? Quint, I see your hand.
Yeah, I actually want to piggyback on the very good and interesting question that Tima brought up, and I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but I find myself struggling a lot these days with Kelly talked about climate change, but we could talk about 1,000 other things too. But just on the other side of the Potomac River, we've got a new governor who's caused chaos with his whatever he's doing about masking, and now he's trying to about what's going to be taught in the schools. And then they're doing the same thing in Florida and everything. And I, just sort of reading through a blog post today, I saw a very powerful meme. And I think, I can't remember who was talking about memes. If it was Kelly, I think it may have been, I don't know, or Ceylon, but it was Ruby Bridges. It was actually not the famous Norman Rockwell painting of Ruby Bridges being escorted by marshals to school, but it was a meme that was a photograph of her with Martha coming down steps. So you're seeing her coming down the steps and there's marshals on either side and everything. And the meme was something like, if she could endure all of this to go to school, you can probably handle a little bit about hearing your history. And I guess I was really struck by that. And I guess my question to all of you is, given the, just frankly depressing and almost inexplicable madness that's out there with regard to vitriol, pushback, I would almost say, which just deeply worries me. And Kelly, you may have already sort of suggested this, touched on it, but how can the arts punch through that? How can we overcome that? Because it really can be very despairing. I need some good artists and some good art to keep me going, give me that hope that we're going to overtake it. So thoughts on that, because it really is dispiriting. It feels like, wait, as Tuliza was saying, it feels like everything, you think everything's settled, and then whoosh, backwards. What's going on?
Quinn, thank you for your question. It's good to see you again.
Very good to see you.
I think being raised and around museums that specialize in African American history and culture, really, you just keep soldiering on. When I was growing up, I thought that all museums got regular bomb threats. And it wasn't until I went to the National Gallery of Art for that year and I realized they weren't getting bomb threats, that it was not a universal museum experience. But it is something that happens a lot with ethnic specific museums. And I think that just in the same way that you keep fighting, you know, on an external, in your daily life, you still have to do that at your job, and you're still reaching people. And even some of the people that don't want to come, and I can give you an example, at my father's first museum, there was a cross burned outside in the yard. And it was by these two teenage boys, and they caught who the two teenage boys were. And it was decided with the judge that if they can go into the museum and write a term paper based on the exhibition they saw, they would not get juvenile detention. And so these are ways where you can actually make a difference, even if it's only for a couple of lives, is something that I think is important to continue to do and not allow that. It affects you, but don't allow that to change your trajectory in terms of what you want to accomplish.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I'm afraid I'm saying your name wrong, but I see your hand. Please correct my.
No, you said it correctly. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So I suppose from my perspective, I have a background in music and dance, that I've always seen arts as a way that society expresses itself, its opinions, its beliefs. And so I've seen art used both to sort of help limit or lessen racism or other inequities, but also as a weapon to promote segregation. So for example, a recent thing in pop culture is until recently, there haven't been very many Black artists in the country charts, but now they're all over the place. And people have made a big deal about it in the country music world, that that's a new thing. And I've seen, you know, when I taught in schools, I used to provide Indian dance as a method for educating. And I was in pretty much every public school in Virginia, DC, and Maryland at one point or another. And the expression of people's beliefs and their cultures in response to our presentation varied based on their own experience and their own level of tolerance. So I see it as both ways, but one of the great things that I've noticed recently is that there is so much more exposure of different gender identities, different races in all aspects of art, that the limited view that we have of other people, the others, is getting lessened. And so in that way, I think it's not as easy to hate another person or think less of another person when you see similarities because there's more visibility. And that's one of the ways I think that art can help in ways that others can't. Because when you go into a museum, there are paintings by everyone. You're not going to go into a museum of just white painters or Black painters or whatever. In a lot of spaces in art, you see everybody and you see all of it and you can appreciate all of it, even in television and media. Just my opinion.
Thank you. And you started out with some things I think are really, really important to remember, that art can not only be social resistance, it can be social oppression, right? That there are plenty of examples that the Nazis used art. What's the Portuguese saying under the dictatorship? Football, Fatima, and Fado, about the traditional music of Portugal will keep the people in compliance. And the I'm just going to throw in the chat in case anybody's interested, the whole thing about the country charts. It's just we forget that those charts exist were created purely to segregate audiences. You know, country music, blues music, popular music has always been an integrated but largely Black defined realm. So you had so many other things in there, and I want to make sure the rest of our panelists can respond to them. Those were my initial reactions.
Well, I really like the way that she talked about, and I'm sorry, I don't have your name, but art as a weapon. You know, I think that's a really interesting concept that when you legitimize one group over another, and if a museum only has white males in it, and you can think about like the National Portrait Gallery at one point in its history was largely white male, and they've really changed their direction to be more inclusive, but there's still a lot of institutions still like that. And country music is changing, but it was also like that in the way that you said. And I think this idea of just being there, who's not there and who is there, is a type of weapon. So it's not something I thought about before, but it's a really interesting concept to talk about how just being there can diminish other people's experiences in this world when it's not inclusive.
I'm reminded of a certain museum I visited recently that's clearly a collection of a white guy's pillaging of Europe, in one white guy in particular. I think that's which museum, maybe.
Colonialist institutions, absolutely.
Yes.
I have another question for Ceylon. Is that
Ceylon?
Ceylon? I'm
you got
sorry.
it.
Okay, Ceylon.
Yeah.
I also play flute, but only as an amateur. So let's just put that out there. Just I'm nowhere on your level. But one of the things I did notice with the Washington Area Flute Association is is that I felt it wasn't worth the fight to try to feel like I had a place there. And so what it's done is push. I've taken myself out of it, but I've taken myself out of the opportunity to have that experience. And I find that to be very difficult. I studied engineering, and as a student, I was in the Black Engineer Society. There's a national organization for Black engineers. So I was very accustomed to a space that I'm in, having a place for me to feel comfortable without having to be separated from it. And that was the first time I've ever been in a space where there was no other place for me to go to feel comfort and or to feel comfortable. And because of that, they were like, well, if you don't like it, you don't have to be here. And I was wondering, in your professional life, in as a musician, especially with flute, have you experienced that as well?
Cool. Yeah. No. I'm glad you asked that. No, there are practices in many music societies, art societies at large that are still very much traditional in some ways, maybe even elitist, and are not truly equitable, and they don't. Yeah, they're just not equitable. My personal sort of thing I don't like is being asked to perform for free at a convention or a conference, and because I think artists should be compensated for their time. Yeah, but in general, I'll say specifically to that, what for a sense of belonging and being able to have community. First of all, I'm sorry that you felt pushed out of a craft that I'm sure you were passionate about. So let me say that. That said, I am a part of an institution called the Emotion Flute Institute, which is by and for, but in no ways exclusive, but celebrates the voices of African descendant flutists of African descent. And so it simply provides a space for us to have a space to teach, to learn, to share our stories, to do master classes, to uplift the next generation. But truly, no one is left out. We allow folks to participate and to audit and join and to observe, and just know that it's going to be a Black affirming space. But you don't have to be Black to be a part. And truly, we want, like any great arts organization, any great organization, we want everyone to support it, because truly, when someone benefits, when group benefits, then it helps us all benefit, right? So just rounding that up, it is unfortunate that, and also going back to what Patrick was saying too, just like, sometimes art in an oppressive way isn't overt. It's sometimes something that's more sort of deadly is those sort of covert ways that kind of make you question, is it something that I did wrong? Is that why I'm not in this, in said space? Am I not enlightened enough to be in this space? And sometimes that can be more damaging than just the overt racism or oppression that can just make it very clear that you shouldn't be there. So, but thank you for that question. I hope that gave you some insight, and I'd love to connect offline.
I'm curious, is your organization devoted to classical flute, or is it broader than that?
We are broader than that. You know, in a lot of our committee planning meetings, we've had fun conversations about those who kind of want to break classical music and just focus on maybe sort of music from various cultures, specifically African diaspora. But then we'll have voices, including my own, who'll say, but I like Mozart, but I like Beethoven. I actually, you know, specialize in this, and I'm Black, and you know, or whatever. And so it's something where we've I think for the better come to a consensus to say that we are not a monolith as a community, as a group, and simply we can show that we are capable of being excellent in all of those said genres.
Thank you. Well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time, and I've really enjoyed hearing the stories of our panelists and the questions from our participants. I dropped my email address in the chat. If anybody would like to get in touch with anybody else, I'm happy to try to facilitate that as best I can. I think our host Greg can probably help on that front as well. Let me thank you, panelists, for taking time out of your busy lives to join us today. Maybe a quick round of applause virtually. And thanks to all of you who came out tonight. This has really been, I found it really fun. I hope you did as well. I do want to give a final plug for Arts for All. I know we've been talking about needing to facilitate the payment of our artists, but sometimes it's nice to give back to our institutions as well. So Giving Day is coming up on March 9th, and we do actually have an Arts for All fund that will help student artists as they go through their careers here at the University of Maryland, if you care about very much. So if it's in your power to do so, I invite you to check that out. Anything else we need to say, Greg, as we wrap up?
Oh, I think we're good. I think hopefully everybody enjoyed their time this afternoon. And again, thank you, Patrick, for moderating and our three panelists. I thought it was a very interesting conversation. And thanks everybody for coming. And there are other programs going on this week, so the week's not over. There's still some events left. If you haven't already gone to something else this week, there's other programs happening in the next few days. And certainly invite you to join us at the Dean's Colloquium, that link that Patrick listed. And that's about it. Go Terps.
Thank you.
I'll just say, stay healthy, Arts for All, go Terps.
Thank you.
Thank you.